Welcome to the School of Sustainability More to Explore session. My name is Bridget Bavisett. I graduated from the School of Sustainability and I now work with student services, and I've also been teaching some classes for about 11 years now, including some study abroad programs, and we'll get a little bit into that later as we go. Sustainability itself is such an amazing field of study because it's transdisciplinary. That helps us with our jobs in the sense that in the United States, only 1 out of 4 adults have a job that's related to their major. If you ask your parents what they studied in college, and then is their job directly related to that, chances are only 1 in 4 have that. In our program, our graduates are 3 times that number. 72% of our alumni are directly working in sustainability. It's transdisciplinary approach so that when we look at a problem, we're going to think, how would an engineer fix this? How would a businessman? How would someone in policy and governance? How would a social worker look at this problem? How would a scientist approach it? That helps us solve very complex problems, because in sustainability, we're looking at the economy, the environment, and society, and how connected all 3 of those areas are. And these are real world applications of what we're going to be experiencing out in the world. So when our students are with us, we're working on getting them prepared to go out into their communities and have jobs through internships and through capstone research. When we have majors at the School of Sustainability, we've got these areas to choose from. If you're interested in a Bachelor of Arts degree with 2 years of a language, there's international development sustainability, policy and governance is one of our tracks, society and sustainability, as well as urban dynamics, such as how cities are evolving. A lot of those are very people-centric jobs. On our Bachelor of Science degree, which requires 2 years of math, there's economics of sustainability, more of the corporate approach, ecosystems, looking at that incredible life support system of our planet, and of course, sustainable energy, materials, and technologies. When you take courses in the School of Sustainability, you're learning about all 7 of these areas. And then as you become a junior, senior, you start focusing in on the area that you're most passionate about. And per our subject today, we opened a Bachelor of Science in Food Systems just a couple years ago. This was driven by student interest, wanting us to be able to focus on food systems for our planet as we have a growing population. So this presentation of Dinner for 9.6 Billion, we're going to be looking at the global food supply, all these challenges and solutions. So a few of the challenges that I'll address this morning: loss of farmlands, deforestation, how climate change affects our food system, how policy and governance plays a role with our food supply and distribution efforts. We're going to also look at the benefits of growing food within our cities. For instance, when we have urban farming, there's less water for agriculture that's needed, fewer greenhouse gas emissions from transporting food. You need fewer pesticides and fertilizers when you grow food vertically or through aquaponics with fish. We'll be looking at that. And it's also cleaner air quality for our cities to be able to grow food within our cities. The whole reason that sustainability has become so much more important than ever, if you look at the population of humans on the earth, we first hit 3 billion in 1960. By 1999, we passed the 6 billion mark. We more than doubled the number of humans on our planet in just 39 years. You might wonder, did we double our water supply? No. Did we double farmland to grow food? No, we've actually been losing farmland. So we're not growing as fast with our population, but we're still on our way to 9.6 billion, and this will be our lifetimes. So this just isn't a problem off in the future. This is something that we will be facing. When we look at how we've been losing farmland, I am talking to you right now from my 12th week of quarantine in Chandler, Arizona. This is an image taken by NASA of Chandler in 1989 up on top, and then 20 years later in 2009. And you can see how a lot of that farmland was developed out by the city growing out. And you can see the new freeway, the Route 202 was built. A lot of our cities all over the earth, and especially in the United States, you may have seen this where you live, we have farmland that surrounds our cities, and suddenly it becomes another housing development, or it becomes a shopping center, an office supply place. We have this happening around the world. So as cities get bigger, the places that grow our food are becoming more and more distant. Another problem that we're seeing around the world is deforestation. So when we look at the estimates of what's happening out there in the deforestation arena, said 27%, like more than a quarter of the Amazon biome is going to be without trees within about 9 or 10 years. The deforestation is happening because of logging needs, because of urban development, what I just showed you with the Chandler slides of cities building out. Whenever we're building new roads for cars, and we have a car-centric transportation system, we're cutting down a lot of our trees. And instance it's happening specifically in Brazil, they're cutting down and burning the Amazon forest because they need to have cattle ranches. Food supply is in such short supply in Brazil. There's such a scarcity issue, and this has been happening for years now. People are very hungry, so they need more farmland for a growing population in Brazil, so they're burning the Amazon. So this is where they're planting cattle, or rather they're growing cattle ranches, or they're planting soy because they can sell that and help the economy in Brazil. So as a lot of you may already realize, we call the Amazon rainforest the lungs of the earth. So much of the earth's oxygen is dependent on that area. And if we're losing that rainforest, which helps oxygenate our planet, this is a huge problem for the world as a whole. But yet, if you live in Brazil, they feel that this is something that they need to do for their economy and for their society. They're sacrificing the environment. In sustainability, we work to make sure it's a win-win-win, something that's good for the environment and economy and people. And another reason around the planet that we're losing a lot of our forestry is because of hydropower dams. It's good to have a renewable energy source such as hydropower, but we have to be paying attention to the long-term effects of losing this tree cover. One of the ways that we're being affected with our food supply is through the climate change in the coffee belt. If you may have noticed, if you've been into a Starbucks, a lot of the stores have a mural that shows the coffee belt, and it shows these countries that have traditionally been amazing climates to grow coffee. Perfect humidity, perfect temperatures, but these countries are struggling now. As example, now with coffee plantations, this is a look at the northern end of South America. This is the now compared to what it will be in the future of how we've been losing this land because of the coffee plantations, struggling with climate change issues as well as with the deforestation that's happening. When we look at countries around the world, I was scheduled to be in Cambodia and Vietnam right now today on a study abroad program, which was canceled due to COVID. But our students were looking at the fact that salt water expands as it warms, and warming oceans are causing sea level rise. So this course that I would be teaching now is looking at how the rising sea levels are affecting Cambodia and Vietnam. This is considered the rice capital of Southeast Asia. And when we have a situation of saltwater flooding the rice plains, they're having trouble growing rice. So a lot of farmers there have switched to shrimp plantations. The good news is shrimp is a protein, it's a food, it's important. It's actually making more money for the farmers to grow the shrimp rather than have the rice fields. But then again, rice is one of the 3 staple foods in the world. We need to have rice as an affordable food source in a lot of places. And if they can't grow it in areas because of sea level rise, we have to be preparing for that and looking at that towards the future. I taught a course in Cuba. I was there in 2017 as well as in 2018. These are my students in 2018. Cuba's been struggling with food supply for decades. The Soviet Union was in Cuba from 1962 to 1991. And when the Soviet Union left in 1991, they took with them all of their farming equipment. So suddenly the Cubans didn't have farming equipment. They were not getting imported foods because we had trade embargoes. The United States was not trading with Cuba from 1962 to 1977. We had a small window where we had some measure of trade with them, but that closed again in 1982. We also had a small window when I was there in 2017 with the former administration, but again, it's closed. So in Cuba, they're not getting food imported from the United States or the United States allies. So they have to grow their own food. And here's the challenge. When we opened that window for tourism in 2016 under the Barack Obama administration, 11 different cruise ship companies signed contracts to bring cruise ships into Havana and into Cuban ports. This was wonderful for the economy of Cuba to have an influx of all the tourism. The challenge is they needed to feed the tourists and they were struggling just to feed themselves. So there was a trade-off there of how can we feed all of these tourists and have restaurants and have that tourism for our economy, but we don't have the farmland we need and we don't have the imports. There were actually 4.75 million travelers that came in to Cuba just in 2018, and this was a challenge for them. One of my students in Cuba took a picture of her family's ration books. The Castro administration gave all Cubans, starting in 1991, when the Soviets left the country, a ration book of, we will help you have food supply. So when we were there in 2017 and in 2018, our families were telling us that their rations were 1 chicken leg a month per person, 1 egg a month per person. So obviously you can't survive on this. It was just something the government was helping to supplement. And my host family in Cuba had chickens in their kitchen. They were trading eggs with their neighbor who was growing mangoes. Technically, this was considered black market food, but the government never cracked down on it because people need to survive. And the Cubans were doing whatever that they could to survive. And as part of that, they did urban farming. When we bring speakers to Wrigley Hall for the School of Sustainability, we have had Nobel laureates and Pulitzer Prize winners. The Secretary of the Navy came out to talk to our students. Tom Vilsack, who was the Secretary of Agriculture from the previous administration, has visited our school twice to talk to students. Two of the points that he made specific to food systems is that in the US, 40% of our food is just going to landfills. Those of you who may have worked in restaurants or even when you go out dining with your family, you see a lot of to-go bags. And if it's like my house, my kids bring the to-go bags home, forget about them, and we end up throwing food away. If we compost that food waste, that's better than just having it go to a landfill. But the true thing would be to eat the right amount of food and to be able to not waste that water and energy it took to grow the food. And the other thing that we're looking is that every year Americans, like less than 1% of Americans claim farming is their occupation. So who would be growing this food for us, for the other 99% of us? We're looking at the issues that we're talking about right now to meet this need. In the US, you can see how it's dropped. Early at the beginning of the century, more than 1/3 of Americans were farmers. We're now less than 1%, and this has created less of a supply for us. The other situation we have around the world are these huge mega cities. You can see on this map, all of the red dots represent a city with 10 million or more people. So around the world, you have huge cities where the nearest farm might be 1,000 miles away. So how do we get food to where it's needed to be? There's an amazing session coming up, and I hope you can join us today at 11:30. Professor American's going to be talking specifically about how COVID affected the food transportation system, and I encourage you to listen in today at 11:30 for that session on how the COVID affected and unraveled our food supply. So when we look at these distribution problems, it would be smart to grow food within our cities. So Tom Vilsack talked specifically about this. When we hit that 9.6 billion people again in our lifetimes, 3 out of 4 of us will be living in a city of 10 million or more. The image on the right is an image, it's not an existing building yet, but on the left you see the building in Tokyo. When we grow food vertically up the sides of buildings, There were so many benefits, some of them that we didn't even anticipate. But these ancillary benefits, such as the crops insulate the buildings. So these buildings are warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer. They use less energy. That's very important in our big cities to reduce energy demand so that we all have efficient energy and what we need. Another huge benefit is that cities that have a lot of urban farming have seen a decrease in respiratory illnesses. Chicago is an example of this. Chicago has more than 2.5 million square feet of urban farming, rooftop gardens and vertical farming. If you've flown through O'Hare Airport, you may have seen all the vertical farming inside the terminal that's feeding 60 restaurants at that airport to be able to support their food needs. When we have this vertical farming, the plants take carbon out of the air and put out fresh oxygen. So we're helping to keep the air cleaner. Another benefit is that with aquaponics, there's no soil involved with vertical farming. And so you don't need the pesticides, chemicals, and fertilizers that are traditionally used in the United States for land farming. Some of you may have studied in the Gulf of Mexico. We have an entire region of the Gulf of Mexico that's called the oxygen deprived area, and nothing will grow there. And it resulted because of all of the pesticides and chemicals in the Mississippi Delta being washed into the Mississippi River through rains and flooding, washing down into the Gulf of Mexico. This affected shrimp farming and fishing for the fishermen in Louisiana and Mississippi. They have to get past that dead zone now. We can avoid those types of challenges to our estuaries and our water systems to be able to grow food vertically. And the very best, most wonderful benefit to do this is that we can grow food using only 10% of the water that's used in traditional agriculture now. So around the world, you may be hearing about water scarcity challenges. We can preserve 90% of the world's water supply to grow our food this way. That agricultural water we could be using for other benefits and for humans. These are some photos of my students in Cuba. When we went to an urban farm, this man converted his entire yard into an amazing garden. On the right picture there. If you notice, there's some colored plastic bottles that are upside down planted in between his plants. We assume that that might be part of his irrigation for his farm at his house. It's actually very clever what this man does. He gets plastic bottles and he paints them a bright color to attract bugs, but he coats the bottles with a light little vegetable oil, puts them in between his plants. So the bugs are attracted to the color, they get stuck on the oil and they don't eat his plants. It's a very clever organic choice that he made. On the left, that beautiful young girl, we volunteered at a Haitian refugee camp, and this woman was raising her family from 2011 when the earthquake happened in Haiti. They brought over their family to Cuba, and for the last 8 years, when we were there in 2018, they were just living in a refugee area, and our students helped to build a community garden and help keep a food supply for people that were still struggling to find a way to move on with their lives. I was scheduled to teach in Singapore in May, and that trip has been approved for next year. So we will be in Singapore and Malaysia, May of 2021, fingers crossed. In Singapore, they are rated the 11th most sustainable city in the world. And one of the reasons is that they do so much urban farming in that city and in that country. It's just amazing that they're able to grow so much food, and they don't have a lot of issues that other cities might have. For instance, the whole urban heat island effect. In the Phoenix area, we have so much concrete with our roads and our roofs and our sidewalks. During the day, when it's hot, the concrete soaks up that sun, and at night, that temperature stays high because of the concrete not cooling off at night. 30 years ago in Phoenix, we actually had cooler nighttime temperatures. We didn't have as much of an urban heat island effect. If Phoenix was able to replicate a lot of what's being done in Singapore, if we had more greenery and not as much concrete pours, then we would be able to have a cooler evening and not diminish that urban heat island effect. So you can learn from countries around the world One of the major components of sustainability is collaboration and participation, learning from what areas of the world, what they're doing, how they're facing challenges. Sometimes you can replicate it exactly. Usually you have to adapt it for your regional area. Maybe it's different politics or different zoning laws or different climates, but we are able to look at what other places are doing and see what we can be able to replicate. The Bachelor of Science in Sustainable Food Systems degree that we just opened up this past year is absolutely amazing. Undergraduate degree students can get careers in food and agricultural sectors, and these sectors are continually growing because obviously we have more people to feed. Students are learning to be innovative problem solvers who understand that complex interconnection between food itself. We're not only looking at how we're growing food, we're looking at what we're growing, we're looking at alternative resources. We have a professor at the School of Sustainability, Professor Ariane Cease, who has been doing a locust project. And in areas where there's an incredible abundance of locusts that's actually harming the environment, it's also considered a protein source. So looking at how we can deal with what nature is giving us, try to find that win-win-win for humans as a society, for our environment, for our economy. And then with food systems, we're also looking at the GMOs, the genetically modified organisms. Sometimes that sounds very scary, and there are some issues with Monsanto and some of the companies that produce genetically modified foods. And we have to kind of find what's not working, try to make it work. But in reality, we've had hybrid tomatoes for more than a century. That's a genetically modified food that we created as a hybrid tomato. But when we create modified foods genetically, and maybe we make the seeds sterile, that's an example of where we're causing problems. If farmers have to buy seeds every single year for their crops, that's expensive for them. They're not able to plant their seed corn, which is traditionally the best way to be farming, to be able to take what you have and make it work for the next year. So food supply is affected by natural resources, by water supply. It's affected by policy and governance. Some areas, it's easier to be able to have urban farming. As an example, again, in Chandler, we're not allowed to have chickens in certain areas of the city. Whereas other places in the Phoenix metro area, you can have a chicken in your backyard. So part of sustainability is also looking at policy and governance and how to make it easier for people to be able to have what they need. There's an interesting video. In fact, my colleague Colin is in the chat room. If you want to post this link into the chat box. There was a family that moved into Mesa that had a swimming pool in their backyard, and they created an entire urban garden out of their swimming pool. They drained the pool. They kept the deep end kind of as a water pond where they had fish growing so that they could be growing tilapia mostly. Over the pond, they put in like a nesting area for chickens. So the chickens are fertilizing the water with the fish. They're growing plants from it. So instead of having a swimming pool as an urban garden, it's an urban garden in the Phoenix area. So we have situations like that where even though as a city, maybe there's not a lot going on, but as individuals, we have so many choices. One of the things that we can do that makes a huge benefit for the food system is to buy locally wherever you live. If there's farmers markets, if there's co-ops, and you support the local farmers, that's so good in so many ways. The food's usually more nutritious for you. It's not transported across the country, putting up those greenhouse gas emissions from the big 18-wheeler trucks. The food that's grown locally is also fresher food because it gets to your table more quickly. So definitely check out co-ops in your area. There was an amazing project. School of Sustainability students were working with vacant land in the city of Phoenix and approaching the city of Phoenix and saying, hey, this vacant land is just basically a trashed lot. We know you're going to build a skyscraper here in another 5 or 10 years, but meanwhile, we want to make it an urban farm. So the city of Phoenix worked with students, and the students worked with homeless people. Refugees had been coming into Phoenix who had farming skills, but nowhere to really put that into practice. And we were able to create urban farms around the city of Phoenix. That's another exciting benefit where we're working with city governments and trying to create opportunities, economic opportunities, where the people who were originally homeless now had a place that they could plant some seeds and grow food and sell that food. And this is part of that social equity issue that the Bachelor's of Science in Sustainable Food Systems looks at, the fact that food needs to be affordable and it needs to be abundant. Colin, if you don't mind posting into the chat box another link, one of my very favorite TED Talks is Ron Finley's The Guerrilla Gardener of South Central Los Angeles. It's like a 15, 16-minute talk. He's a great, engaging speaker, and he talks about how his area of South Central Los Angeles, you have to ride a bus for 20 minutes just to get a fresh tomato. Their only options were fast food. He wanted to be able to grow food and to teach kids the wonderful taste of a fresh cucumber. And he was able to make this happen in an area that was considered a food desert. When we have big cities and there's usually an area of lower income people, it could be a food desert. Grocery stores may not want to build in that area because they're afraid of vandalism. We've seen a lot of this with Detroit, when Detroit, the city, started becoming more abandoned spaces. When we look at these social equity issues, we need to make sure that no matter what income people have, that they have access to healthy, nutritious food. So with the Bachelor of Science in Food Systems, there's different areas of focus. Students can be looking at educational leadership, procurement of supply chain. Students can focus in on global engagement. They can be looking specifically at public health and nutrition, the business and innovation, different entrepreneurships and agribusiness. We actually have a place in the Phoenix metro area called Agritopia. It's a place where you can live in Gilbert, Arizona, and it's got community farms and everybody's being able to have their neighbors growing food and share with each other. There's actually a wait list to buy a home in Agritopia. Policy and governance is a huge part of the role of food systems. And then of course, ecosystems is a big part of this, making sure we have a healthy ecosystem. So with the Bachelor of Science Sustainable Food System degree, students are working with real world situations, looking at that, analysis, problem solving. There's a lot of quantitative reasonings and statistics, teamwork and collaboration. We look at practical solutions. So as a student, you might get an internship where you're working on a farm and learning as you go. And you have these opportunities once you get that degree to work locally or regionally within your state or on a national level or even globally, have opportunities to travel, like the study abroad programs that I've taken students around the world. ASU itself is looking at food systems as part of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We are 5th in the world out of 766 institutions who achieved all 17 of these goals working towards that target. We're number 5 in the world. In the United States, only 3 universities made it into the top 100, and we're number 1 in the US. So this is a good place to get your feet wet and start. This is some information of contact information. I'm going to come back to this slide if you can take a screenshot of it now, or I'll be coming back to it. Just to let you know again, the upcoming session at 11:30, how COVID unraveled our food system, is going to be an amazing presentation from Professor Merrigan. Definitely check that out. And those are 4 more sessions that we have today, ending with Q&A with current sustainability students. We also have these other sessions recorded on YouTube. So going back, I want to open it up real quick on the chat box and ask if there's any questions.
Food is a big, big deal. It is more than just composting. It is how we grow it, where, the social justice, the equity, all of that's available here. One of the fun things I posted in there is actually the USDA food desert map locator. So we encourage you, you may not know this, there could be a food desert in your community. And if you are interested in this and you want to be a change agent, you can help solve that here at the School of Sustainability. So we're more than happy to answer any questions.
And if you also want to reach out to me later, I'm happy to connect with you. As is Colin, you can just call into the school week, and you can also just shoot an email. If you're looking at this as an option for study, it's just amazing. This actually was driven by students who wanted to study food system challenges. I will be happy to talk to you at any point. Again, I hope to see you at 11:30. Professor Merrigan's presentation is amazing because she's talking about what's happening right now with our food system, distribution. You may have heard about the farmers at the dairy farms who had to dump milk. There's so much happening right now, and you can be a part of these solutions already, even from your own home. So thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you here on the call, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. And please feel free to connect with us as soon as you would like to. Thank you so much.